Sometimes the cruelest moments in our lives become the doorway to our greatest strength. Sometimes the people who cast us aside are the very ones who set us free. In the winter of 1887, the town of Bitter Creek decided Sarah Caldwell was worthless. Paralyzed from the waist down after a wagon accident, she had become a burden they no longer wanted to bear. So they sent her up the mountain to Ezra Stone, a feared mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness. It was meant as a joke, a way to be rid of her. They expected her to fail. But in that remote cabin, something changed. Sarah discovered she was far stronger than anyone imagined. What happens when the person everyone throws away becomes the one who matters most? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bitter Creek wasn't always a cruel place. There was a time when neighbors helped neighbors, when winter months meant shared resources and communal warmth. But 3 hard years of drought, failed crops, and a brutal winter had changed things. Survival became personal. Compassion became a luxury the town could no longer afford. Sarah Caldwell remembered better days. She remembered when her laugh could fill a room, when her hands moved swiftly across fabric, creating dresses that made the women of Bitter Creek feel beautiful despite the harsh frontier life. She remembered dancing at the summer social with Thomas, her husband, his strong arms guiding her across the wooden planks laid out under the stars. She remembered feeling useful, wanted, necessary. The accident happened on a Tuesday in September 3 years back. A simple trip to collect supplies from the neighboring settlement. The wagon wheel hit a washout in the road, hidden by autumn leaves. The whole rig went over. Thomas walked away with bruises. Sarah never walked again. Doc Winters had done what he could, set the broken bones in her spine, administered laudanum for the pain, spoke in careful medical terms about nerve damage and permanent injury. Thomas held her hand through it all, promised it didn't matter, swore they'd face it together, and for 6 months he kept that promise. He carried her, cared for her, loved her through the darkest days of adjustment. Then the fever came, quick and merciless, the way sickness often was on the frontier. Thomas burned with it for 3 days before his heart gave out. Doc Winters said there was nothing anyone could have done. Sarah knew better. She knew the exhaustion of caring for her had weakened him, made him vulnerable. She carried that guilt like a stone in her chest. After Thomas died, the town's charity lasted exactly 4 weeks, long enough to seem decent. Then came the subtle changes. Fewer visits, shorter conversations. Eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. The preacher stopped mentioning her in Sunday prayers. The women's auxiliary found reasons why she couldn't participate in their gatherings anymore. Too difficult to accommodate, too sad to be around, too much trouble. Mrs. Helena Thornton, the banker's wife, had been the worst. She'd never liked Sarah, even in the good days. Too pretty, too talented, too happy. Now she led the Whisper campaign with surgical precision. "Such a burden on the community," she'd say, loud enough to be overheard but quiet enough to seem discreet. "Resources are scarce. We must think of those who can contribute." The other women would nod, grateful someone was saying what they'd been thinking. Mayor Edmund Hargrove was a practical man who prided himself on making difficult decisions. He kept the town running through drought and hardship with an iron fist wrapped in political platitude. When the town council met in January of 1887, Sarah's situation topped the agenda. She wasn't present to defend herself. No one thought to invite her. The discussion, recorded in the official ledger in the mayor's precise hand, was brief. Sarah Caldwell, widow, age 28, paralyzed, no family, no means of support, ward of the territory, unfit for community care. Proposal: relocation to appropriate accommodation. The vote was unanimous. Doc Winters attended that meeting. He was the only one who spoke against the proposal, though his objection was measured and ultimately ineffective. "The woman is not ill," he said. "She's injured. There's a difference. Her mind is sound, her hands work fine, given proper support, which we cannot provide," Mayor Hargrove interrupted. "Doctor, we appreciate your medical opinion, but this is a matter of resource allocation. We have children to feed, families to support. Mrs. Caldwell, through no fault of her own, requires care we simply cannot sustain. So, where do you propose to send her?" Doc Winters asked. The mayor smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "We've identified a solution that serves multiple purposes. There's a man living up in the high country, Ezra Stone, former cavalry scout. Lives alone, keeps to himself. The man needs someone to manage his household. Mrs. Caldwell needs a roof over her head. It's a practical arrangement." Doc Winters stared at him. "Ezra Stone? The man hasn't been down from that mountain in 5 years. He's what, Doctor?" Mrs. Thornton leaned forward. "A hermit? A recluse? So is she, practically speaking. They're suited to each other." What she didn't say, but everyone in that room understood, was the real joke. Ezra Stone was feared in Bitter Creek. The stories about him had grown wild over the years. He'd killed 3 men in a single fight. He talked to wolves. He'd gone savage living up there alone. Mothers used his name to frighten children into obedience. "Behave, or Ezra Stone will come down from his mountain and take you away." Sending Sarah to Ezra Stone was meant to be cruel entertainment. Let the useless cripple try to manage a dangerous mountain man. When she failed, when she died up there from cold or neglect or worse, well, at least they'd tried to help her. At least they'd found her a place. No one could say they'd simply abandoned her. The decision was made. The ledger entry was official. Sarah's fate was sealed by men and women who'd once called her neighbor, who'd worn dresses she'd sewn, who'd danced at her wedding. She learned about it 3 days later, when Deputy Martin Collins appeared at the storage room behind the general store where she'd been living. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell, the town council has made arrangements for your care. You're to be relocated to more suitable accommodations." Sarah sat in the old chair by the window, the only furniture in the small room besides her narrow bed. She'd been sewing, making repairs on gloves for the few cents it brought her. Her hands went still on the leather. "Relocated where, Deputy?" he told her. Watched her face go pale, saw her hands grip the chair arms. "Ezra Stone." Her voice was barely a whisper. Even she had heard the stories. "Yes, ma'am. It's already decided. We'll make the trip up the mountain day after tomorrow. You'll want to gather your things." He left before she could respond, relieved to escape the small room and the look in her eyes. Sarah sat alone as the winter afternoon faded to evening. She had very few things to gather. Her life had already been reduced to what fit in a single trunk. Clothes worn thin, Thomas's watch, her sewing kit, a few books, the wedding ring she still wore, though the gold band was now too loose on her thinned finger. She didn't cry. She'd cried herself dry in the months after Thomas died. Now there was only a dull acceptance, a bone-deep weariness. If this was how it ended, sent to a mountain to die in service of the town's casual cruelty, then so be it. She'd lost the will to fight for a place among people who so clearly didn't want her. That night, as wind rattled the loose boards of the storage room, Sarah twisted the wedding ring on her finger and thought about everything she'd lost: her mobility, her husband, her purpose, her place in the world. She had no way of knowing that on a mountain high above Bitter Creek, in a cabin built from pine and determination, a man named Ezra Stone sat by his fire and thought about the message the deputy had brought him that afternoon. They were sending him a woman, a paralyzed woman, another burden the town wanted to dispose of. Ezra stared into the flames and remembered another woman, another time. He remembered cruelty disguised as concern. He remembered loss, and he made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to throw this woman away, he would catch her, And maybe, just maybe, they would both find something worth holding on to. The morning came too soon. Sarah woke in the darkness before dawn, her body stiff from cold and tension. She'd barely slept, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the walls, wondering if this would be her last night among people, such as they were. Deputy Collins arrived with the wagon at first light. He brought another man, Jacob Hayes, to help with the lifting. They were both young, both uncomfortable with the task ahead. They handled Sarah like fragile cargo, avoiding her eyes as they carried her chair outside. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour, not to bid farewell but to witness. Mrs. Thornton stood on the boardwalk outside her husband's bank, arms crossed, satisfaction evident on her sharp features. A few other women clustered nearby, whispering behind gloved hands. Some of the men from the saloon watched from across the street, curious about the spectacle. No one spoke to Sarah directly. No one wished her well. They simply watched as the deputy and his helper loaded her into the back of the wagon, settled her trunk beside her, and arranged blankets around her legs. The morning was bitter cold, the sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Doc Winters appeared just as they were preparing to leave. He carried a canvas bag, which he handed to the deputy. "Medical supplies," he said gruffly. "Laudanum, bandages, whiskey for cleaning wounds, instructions are written inside." Then he turned to Sarah, and for the first time someone met her eyes directly. "Mrs. Caldwell," his voice was quiet, "meant only for her. I'm sorry. This isn't right, and I should have fought harder against it." Sarah managed a small nod. "You tried, Doctor. That's more than most." He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, then stepped back. The deputy clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. Sarah gripped the side rail to steady herself, her trunk sliding against her hip. As they rolled down the main street of Bitter Creek, she looked back once. The town that had been her home for 6 years grew smaller behind her. The people on the boardwalk were already turning away. Returning to their lives, their moment of entertainment concluded. By tonight, she would be a story they told. By next week, she would be forgotten entirely. The road up the mountain was barely a road at all, more a suggestion of passage, worn by the occasional trapper or hunter, brave enough to venture into Ezra Stone's territory. The wagon jolted over rocks and frozen ruts. Sarah clung to the rail, her body jarring with each impact, pain shooting through her deadened legs in phantom echoes of sensation. Deputy Collins drove in silence, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Jacob Hayes sat beside him, rifle across his lap, scanning the tree line as if expecting attack at any moment. The fear radiating from both men would have been amusing if the situation weren't so grim. They climbed for 3 hours. The pine forest grew denser, the air thinner and colder. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. The horses labored, their breath coming in great clouds of steam. Several times the deputy considered turning back. Sarah could see it in the way he glanced at the darkening sky, but orders were orders, and Bitter Creek's expectations clear. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fail, they emerged into a clearing. A cabin stood at the far end, built solid against the base of a rocky outcrop. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. Behind the cabin, the mountain continued upward, disappearing into low clouds and falling snow. The cabin was larger than Sarah expected, well-maintained, with a covered porch running along the front. Stacked firewood lined one wall, protected from the weather. A small barn stood to the left, and she could see chickens scratching in a covered run. This was no desperate hermit's hovel. This was a homestead, carefully built and thoughtfully maintained. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the cabin door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. Ezra Stone was not what Sarah expected. The stories had painted him as wild, unkempt, dangerous. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in simple wool and leather, his dark hair touched with grey at the temples. His face was weathered and bearded, his eyes a startling pale blue that assessed the wagon and its occupants with calm intelligence. He didn't look savage, he looked competent, and completely at ease in a way the two nervous men in the wagon could never manage. "Deputy." His voice was deep, measured, not unfriendly, but not welcoming either, simply factual. Collins climbed down from the wagon seat, hat in hand. "Mr. Stone, we've brought Mrs. Caldwell, as was arranged. As was decided by your town council without my input," Ezra corrected quietly. "But yes, I received word." His gaze moved past the deputy to Sarah in the wagon bed. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something she hadn't seen in 3 years. No pity, no disgust, no uncomfortable avoidance. Just a straight, honest assessment, human to human. "Ma'am," he said with a slight nod. "Mr. Stone," Sarah replied, surprised. Her voice came out steady. Ezra moved down the porch steps with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own body. He approached the wagon, and Collins stepped back involuntarily. "I'll need to carry you inside," Ezra said to Sarah directly. "Wagon's too high to manage any other way, if that's acceptable." It was the first time anyone had asked her permission for anything in months. Sarah found her throat tight. "Yes, thank you." Ezra reached into the wagon bed and lifted her with surprising gentleness, one arm under her knees, one supporting her back. She weighed so little now, wasted by immobility and poor food. He carried her as if she were made of something valuable, not burden or trash. "The trunk," Sarah said. "My things. I'll fetch it once you're settled." Ezra nodded to the deputy. "Put it on the porch, then you can go." It was clearly a dismissal. Collins and Hayes exchanged glances, eager to comply. They hauled Sarah's trunk from the wagon and set it beside the cabin door. Then Hayes pulled something else from beneath the wagon seat. A walking stick, hand-carved from ash, with a smooth grip and a leather loop. "Mr. Stone asked me to make this," Hayes said, addressing Sarah for the first time. "Thought you might need it, for balance and such." Sarah stared at the stick, then at Ezra, who had somehow sent word about her needs before ever meeting her. Her eyes burned with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. Hayes nodded, clearly relieved to have some small redemption for his part in this. He climbed back onto the wagon seat. Deputy Collins hesitated, some part of his conscience apparently still functioning. "Mrs. Caldwell, if you need anything, if there's trouble—" "She won't," Ezra interrupted. "And your town has made clear what kind of help they provide. Best you head down before the snow gets worse." Collins flushed but didn't argue. He climbed aboard and turned the wagon around. Within moments the sound of hoofbeats and wheels faded into the forest, swallowed by snow and distance. Sarah found herself alone with a stranger in the wilderness, being carried into a cabin she'd never seen, in a situation she had no power to change. Every instinct screamed that she should be terrified. But Ezra Stone's calm steadiness, the way he'd spoken to her like a person rather than a problem, had created a strange sense of safety. He carried her through the door, into warmth. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, fire crackling cheerfully. A solid wooden table stood near the kitchen area, shelves lined with supplies and preserved food. A single bed was built into the far corner, covered with thick furs and wool blankets. Everything was clean, organized, purposeful. Ezra set her gently in a chair near the fire, positioning it so she could reach the armrests easily. "I'll get your trunk," he said, and stepped back outside. Sarah sat alone in the warmth, her hands trembling slightly. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, coffee and leather. It smelled like safety, like home, though that seemed impossible after only moments. Ezra returned with her trunk, which he set near the bed. Then he pulled the walking stick from his belt, where he'd tucked it, and leaned it against Sarah's chair within easy reach. "Hands work fine?" he asked. She nodded, surprised by the question. "Good. You'll want to work them. Keep the strength up. Cold makes muscles tight. There's leather scraps in that box by the window if you know how to use them. I can always use repair work on my gear. He moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 tin cups, brought one to her. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warmth, breathing in the bitter steam. "Mr. Stone," she began. "Ezra," he corrected. "We're past formalities, I think." "Ezra." She paused, searching for words. "I don't understand. Why did you agree to this?" "The town, they expect," she stopped, unable to voice what the town expected. Failure, death, entertainment. Ezra settled into a chair across from her, his own coffee cup held loosely. "I know what they expect. Been watching that town poison itself with small cruelties for years. Saw it during the war, too. Good people turning mean when times get hard, looking for someone to blame, someone to cast out." He took a sip of coffee, his pale eyes thoughtful. "You didn't deserve what they did to you? Nobody does. So I figured, they want to throw you away? I'll catch you. See if maybe we can't both find something worth keeping up here." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, unable to stop them. For the first time in 3 years, someone had chosen kindness when cruelty was easier. Ezra stood, moved to the trunk, gave her privacy to cry. "There's a bed ready. Food when you're hungry. We'll figure the rest as we go, one day at a time." Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the wagon tracks, erasing the path back to Bitter Creek. Inside the cabin, by the warmth of the fire, Sarah Caldwell took her first real breath in 3 years. She didn't know it yet, but she had just arrived home. Spring came slowly to the high country, announcing itself first in sounds rather than sights. The ice on the creek began to crack and sing. Birds returned with their morning conversations. The wind shifted, carrying warmth instead of bitter cold. Sarah had transformed along with the season. 3 months on the mountain had built muscle in her arms and shoulders, given her face color from the sun, put a steadiness in her hands that came from daily work. She moved through the cabin with confidence now, transferring from bed to chair to sled without assistance. Outside, she could maneuver herself short distances on flat snow, using the walking stick and her considerable arm strength. The leatherwork had become her trade. What started as simple repairs had evolved into genuine craftsmanship. She made gloves lined with rabbit fur, vests with decorative stitching, sheaths for knives that were both functional and beautiful. Each piece bore her mark, a small SC worked into the leather. Ezra took her work to Silverton once a month, the nearest real town, 2 days' travel down the mountain. He'd been reluctant at first, worried about leaving her alone, but Sarah had insisted. She was capable of managing the cabin, feeding herself, keeping the fire going. She needed him to trust her independence. He returned from the March trip with a canvas bag heavy with coins and a satisfied expression. "Sold everything," he said, setting the bag on the table. "Merchant wants more. Asked specifically for your work. Says customers are talking about it." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. "They want more. Much as you can make. The gloves especially. Mountain weather's hard on hands. Folks appreciate good work that lasts." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, wrote down what sold best, what prices they brought, thought you'd want to know. Sarah studied the list, her mind already calculating materials needed, time required, designs that would work best. This was income, real money that she earned with her own skill. The bag of coins represented more than just currency, it represented worth. "We split it even," she said. "You provide the materials, do the selling. Fair partnership." Ezra shook his head. "Your work, your money, I got the furs and my own income. Don't need even," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I use your supplies, your shelter, your knowledge. You spend time selling instead of trapping. We're partners in this, or I don't do it." They stared at each other across the table, both stubborn, both principled. Finally, Ezra nodded. "Even it is. But you're taking the larger share since it's your skill bringing the premium price." They settled on 60-40, Sarah taking the larger portion. It felt fair, it felt right, it felt like respect. With spring came new routines. Sarah learned to work outside on the porch, where the light was better and the air fresh. Ezra built her a work table at the right height, with storage underneath for leather and tools. Neighbors passing through, trappers heading to or from Silverton, began to stop and place orders directly. Word was spreading about the quality of her work. One afternoon, as Sarah stitched a complex pattern into a belt, Ezra sat on the porch steps, sharpening his knife, and spoke of things he'd been holding close. "There's talk in Silverton," he said, his tone casual but his focus intent on the blade. "Railroad companies surveying the territory. Looking for routes through the mountains." Sarah's hands stilled. "This far up?" "Everywhere eventually. Progress, they call it. Civilization coming whether we want it or not." She heard the worry beneath his words. "You're concerned about the land. This place. It's been my peace for 5 years. Before that, I had peace nowhere. After Mary and Lily died, after I left the cavalry, I needed quiet, needed space to figure out how to keep living." He tested the knife's edge against his thumb. "Railroad brings people. People bring noise and rules and expectations. Changes things." It was the most he'd ever said about his past, and Sarah understood the gift of it. "Mary was your wife. Lily was your daughter." "Yes. Fever took them both in the same week. I was out scouting, 3 days away. By the time I got back," he stopped, jaw tight. "Town we lived in, they'd already buried them, barely left markers. Said it was necessary. Protect the living. Like my family was contamination to be disposed of." Sarah's throat ached with recognition. Different circumstances, same cruelty. Communities that discarded people when they became inconvenient. "Lily was 5, Ezra continued quietly. She'd been sickly from birth, never quite strong enough. Folks whispered about curses, about weakness in the blood. Mary heard every word, carried that weight along with caring for our daughter. After they died, I couldn't stay. Couldn't look at those people and not see the judgment they'd placed on my family." He set the knife aside and finally met Sarah's eyes. "When that deputy brought word they were sending you, I knew what they were doing. Same thing that was done to my Mary, casting out someone they deemed unworthy. I thought if I couldn't save my family, maybe I could catch someone else that cruel world threw away." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I'm not here to replace them." "No," Ezra agreed. "You're here being exactly who you are. That's enough. That's everything." They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the weight of their histories. Two people rebuilt from broken pieces, not fixed but functional, not whole but healing. That evening, Sarah presented Ezra with a gift she'd been working on for weeks. A pair of snowshoes, modified for her use. She'd studied his design and adapted it, creating shoes with extended handles that would allow her to pull herself along, distributing weight through her powerful arms rather than useless legs. "For next winter," she explained, "when the snow's too deep for the sled chair, I want to be able to move independently." Ezra examined them with an expert's eye, testing the bindings, checking the weave, assessing the modifications. "These will work," he said finally, and she heard the pride in his voice. "You're thinking like a trapper now, adapting to conditions, using what you've got." "I learned from the best," she said simply. As spring deepened into early summer, Sarah's world expanded in ways she'd never imagined. Ezra taught her to shoot, starting with the rifle, then the pistol. Her upper body strength made her surprisingly steady. She couldn't hunt on foot, but she could defend herself and contribute to taking game when opportunity arose. He taught her to read weather, to understand the language of wind and clouds, to recognize the signs that meant shelter should be sought. He taught her which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which could kill. She absorbed it all, hungry for knowledge that made her more capable, more independent, more valuable. One afternoon, as they worked together outside, a wolf pack passed through the lower meadow. 8 animals, grey and massive, moving with purpose. Sarah froze, but Ezra remained calm. "Watch," he said quietly. "They're hunting, focused on their work. We're not prey, not threat, just part of the landscape." The wolves flowed past, beautiful and deadly, paying the humans no more mind than they would a tree. Sarah watched in awe, understanding for the first time what Ezra had built here. Not dominance over nature, but partnership with it, respect given and received. "When I first came here," Ezra said, "I thought I was hiding. Took me 3 years to realize I wasn't hiding at all. I was learning to live differently, learning that survival doesn't mean conquering. Sometimes it means adapting." Sarah understood perfectly. She was learning the same lesson, had been since the day she arrived. Survival wasn't about becoming who she was before the accident. It was about becoming someone new, someone shaped by circumstance, but not defined by limitation. By summer's height, Sarah's reputation had spread beyond Silverton. Orders came from farther settlements, requests for custom work, offers of premium prices. Her name meant quality now. Sarah Caldwell was no longer the worthless cripple of Bitter Creek. She was a craftsperson, an artisan, someone whose work held value. But there was another reputation growing, one that would matter more than she knew. The trappers and traders who stopped at the cabin talked about the woman on the mountain, yes, but they also talked about how wrong Bitter Creek had been, how shameful their treatment, how remarkable her transformation. Those stories traveled, and in traveling they changed things. They changed how people saw disability. They changed assumptions about worth and capability. They changed, slowly but surely, the world's understanding of what was possible. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her greatest challenge was approaching, and when it came, she would discover just how strong she'd become. Doc Winters appeared at the cabin on a bright morning in late July, climbing the mountain path with determination and obvious discomfort. He was not a young man, and the altitude and exertion left him breathless. Sarah spotted him from the porch where she worked and felt her stomach tighten with old anxiety. Ezra was checking the trapline, wouldn't return until midday. She was alone with the first person from Bitter Creek she'd seen since that winter morning 8 months ago. Doc Winters approached slowly, hat in hand, taking in the scene before him. Sarah at her work table, leather and tools spread before her, arms strong and steady, face healthy and alert. The well-maintained cabin, the organized homestead, the clear evidence of not just survival but prosperity. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. "May I come up?" Sarah set down her work and nodded, watching him warily. He climbed the steps, breathing hard, and stood uncertain until she gestured to a chair Ezra had built for visitors. "You look well," he said finally. "Better than I've seen you in years." "I am well." Sarah kept her voice neutral. "What brings you up the mountain, Doctor?" He pulled a bundle of letters from his coat, setting them on the table between them. "These arrived over the past months, from various people in town. I thought you should see them." Sarah stared at the letters but didn't touch them. "I'm not interested in Bitter Creek's opinion of me. I understand. But Sarah, things have changed." He leaned forward, earnest. "The stories about you, about how you're thriving up here, they've gotten back to town. People are—" He searched for the right word. "Ashamed. Of how you were treated, of what was done." "They should be," Sarah said flatly. "They are." Doc Winters ran his hand through his thinning hair. "Mrs. Thornton especially. She's written asking about you, wanting to make amends. Several others too. And Mayor Hargrove, Mayor Hargrove made an official record declaring me unfit and worthless." Sarah interrupted, her voice hard. "He organized my removal like I was trash to be hauled away. What could he possibly have to say now?" Doc Winters opened one of the letters, his hands shaking slightly. "He wants to formally apologize, to invite you back, if you'd consider it. The town has struggled since you left. We lost 4 families over the winter. The community that seemed so eager to cast you out. It's discovering what happens when we start deciding who deserves help and who doesn't. They're discovering consequences, Sarah said, not compassion. The doctor flinched but nodded. You're right, and you have every right to refuse any contact with us. But Sarah, there's more. The territorial governor reviewed several cases of municipal abandonment. Your situation was cited as an example. There's talk of new regulations about how communities must care for injured or disabled residents. Sarah's hands stilled on the leather. Because of me? Because your story got out? Because people heard about a town that sent a paralyzed woman to die on a mountain, and that same woman is now running a successful business and thriving. It made people ask questions about their own assumptions, about what disability actually means versus what we fear it means. Despite her anger, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Her suffering, her abandonment, had created change beyond her own life. The thought was both painful and powerful. I won't come back, she said firmly. This is my home now. Ezra is my family. Whatever Bitter Creek wants, whatever amends they think they can make, I don't need them. I know, Doc Winters said gently, and I told them as much, but I promised to deliver the letters, to check on your welfare, and to report honestly what I found. He stood, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, Sarah, you've changed more than just your own life. You've changed how people think. That matters. After he left, Sarah sat alone with the bundle of letters. She didn't want to read them, didn't want to give Bitter Creek any space in her thoughts. But curiosity and something else, something harder to name, made her pick up the first one. Mrs. Thornton's handwriting was elegant, the words carefully chosen. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, I write with profound regret for the cruelty I showed you. There is no excuse for my behavior, no justification for the pain I caused. I was afraid of what your situation represented, afraid of my own vulnerability, and I let that fear become cruelty. You deserved better. You deserve better still. If you can find it in your heart to forgive, know that I am truly sorry. Sarah set it aside and picked up another. Then another. Letters from people who'd watched her removal, who'd said nothing, who'd participated through silence, all expressing regret, all asking forgiveness, all too late to change what was done, but perhaps not too late to change what would be. When Ezra returned at midday, he found Sarah on the porch, the letters spread around her, tears on her face. Doc Winters came, she said, brought these. The town is sorry now, they want to make amends. Ezra sat beside her, reading the pain in her expression. What do you want to do? Nothing, Sarah said. I don't owe them forgiveness. I don't owe them anything. True, Ezra agreed. But do you want to carry the anger? Sarah thought about that, about the weight she'd been carrying, the fury that had sustained her through the hardest days. I don't know if I can forgive them. Don't have to forgive, can just choose not to let them live in your head anymore. Their guilt is their weight to carry, not yours. She looked at him, this man who'd lost everything and somehow found a way to keep living without bitterness consuming him. How did you do it? Let go of the anger at the people who failed Mary and Lily. Didn't for a long time. Anger kept me warm when nothing else could. But eventually I realized it was burning me from the inside. Had to choose between dying angry or living peaceful. Living seemed worth more. Sarah gathered the letters, tied them with string, and set them in a box. I'll keep them. Maybe someday I'll be ready to respond. Maybe not, but I won't let them define me anymore. I won't let Bitter Creek, past or present, decide my worth. They never could, Ezra said simply. Worth isn't granted by others, it's grown from within. You've been growing yours since the day you arrived. Strongest thing I've ever seen. That evening, Sarah wrote in Mary's journal, the pages now half filled with her own story. Day 234. The past came calling today. brought apologies I never expected and don't know if I can accept. But I learned something important. Their cruelty taught me strength. Their abandonment gave me freedom. Their judgment freed me from seeking their approval. In trying to destroy me, they helped me become something they never imagined possible. I'm not certain if that's justice or irony, but I know it's truth. Tomorrow I'll wake in my home, do my work, live my life. They can keep their guilt. I've got better things to carry. August brought the railroad surveyors. Sarah heard them before she saw them, voices carrying through the forest, rough and loud, disrupting the mountain's peace. Ezra was in Silverton selling goods, wouldn't return until the next day. She was alone when 5 men emerged from the tree line, carrying surveying equipment and an air of ownership that set her teeth on edge. They stopped when they saw her on the porch, surprise evident on their faces. A woman in a wheeled chair, working leather at a table. On land they clearly thought was uninhabited wilderness. "Well, I'll be damned," one of them said, a tall man with a thick moustache and eyes that assessed her with casual dismissal. "Didn't expect to find anyone up here. Especially not a cripple." Sarah set down her work carefully, controlling her anger. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The man laughed. "Private? Ma'am, this is open territory. We're here on behalf of the Continental Pacific Railroad, surveying for the new mountain route. You'll want to move along before construction starts. This land belongs to Ezra Stone. Has for 6 years. Legal claim filed and recognized. You have no authority here." Another man stepped forward, younger but with the same arrogant confidence. "Ezra Stone, the hermit? The railroad's coming through whether he likes it or not. Whether you like it or not." The leader pulled papers from his pack. "I'm Clayton Wolfe, Chief Surveyor for Continental Pacific. We've got territorial approval to survey and, when approved, to claim land necessary for the route. This happens to be the best pass through this range. So you and whoever owns this place need to start making plans to relocate." "Or what?" Sarah kept her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Wolfe's smile was unpleasant. "Or the railroad will relocate you. Simple as that." He looked around the homestead with calculated appraisal. "Nice little setup you've got here. Shame it's sitting right where progress needs to go. But that's the way of things. Can't stop civilization for one man's stubborn claim and his charity case." The casual cruelty of that last phrase hit like a physical blow, but Sarah forced herself not to react. "Mr. Stone will return tomorrow. You can discuss this with him then. Don't need his permission to survey." Wolfe gestured to his men. "Mark the trees, take measurements. We've got work to do." They spread out across the clearing, marking trees with red paint, calling measurements to each other, treating the land like it already belonged to them. Sarah watched, memorizing faces, noting their methods, understanding that this was just the beginning of a fight. When Ezra returned the next afternoon, he knew immediately something was wrong. Sarah sat at her table, work abandoned, her expression tight with worry and anger. "Railroad surveyors," she said. "Clayton Wolfe and 4 others. They marked trees, took measurements, said eminent domain gives them the right to take the land." Ezra's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "They threaten you? Called me a charity case, said we'd be relocated whether we agreed or not." Sarah met his eyes. "Ezra, can they really do that?" He sat heavily in the chair across from her. "Eminent domain is legal, yes, but there are processes, requirements. They can't just take land without proper compensation and proof it's for public good." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We need to fight this." "How?" "Lawyers, documentation, making noise. Railroad companies hate delays and publicity. We make this costly enough, loud enough, they might route elsewhere." He reached across the table and took her hand. "This is your home too, Sarah. If you want to fight, I'll fight with you. If you want to leave, We'll leave together. Your choice." Sarah thought about the months she'd lived here, the person she'd become, the peace she'd found. Thought about being displaced again, cast aside again, told once more that her place in the world was wherever others decided to put her. "I want to fight," she said firmly. "This is my home. Our home. They don't get to take it. Then we fight." Ezra squeezed her hand. "But Sarah, you should know what we're up against. Railroad companies have money, lawyers, political connections. This won't be easy. Nothing worth keeping ever is." That evening, as they planned their strategy, Ezra finally shared the full story of Mary and Lily. Not just their deaths, but their lives, their struggles, and how those struggles connected to everything that was happening now. "Mary was from a good family in Street Louis," he began, staring into the fire. "Met her when I was stationed at Jefferson Barracks. She was educated, cultured, everything I wasn't. But she saw something in me, and I saw everything in her." He pulled an old cavalry medal from the mantel, holding it like a talisman. "We married despite her family's objections. Army wife wasn't what they wanted for her. Things got harder when Lily was born sickly. She had problems with her legs, couldn't walk right, cried a lot. Doctors couldn't say why, just that she was delicate." Sarah listened, seeing the pain etched in every line of his face. "The other army families, they started avoiding us." Mary heard the whispers. "Cursed child, bad blood, punishment for marrying below her station." The cruelty was subtle but constant. Mary carried it all, trying to protect Lily, trying to keep our family together while I was away on patrol. He set the medal down and pulled out a faded photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a small girl in her lap, both looking at the camera with serious expressions. This was taken 6 months before they died. You can see the worry in Mary's face. She knew people were judging her, judging Lily. She wrote me letters about it, but I was too far away, too caught up in military duty to understand how bad it had gotten. Sarah took the photograph carefully, studying the faces of the family Ezra had lost. When the fever came, it moved fast. Mary got sick first, then Lily. The fort doctor did what he could, but resources were limited, and honestly, I think some folks were relieved. One less problem family to deal with. By the time I got back from patrol, they'd been buried 3 days. Town didn't even wait for me to say goodbye properly. His voice broke, and Sarah saw tears on his weathered face. I couldn't save them, couldn't protect them from the sickness or the cruelty or the judgment. That failure, it ate at me for years. Still does some days. "That's why you agreed to take me," Sarah said softly, "when the town sent me up here to die." "Yes and no." Ezra wiped his eyes roughly. "Yes, because I saw the same cruelty, the same casual disposal of someone deemed inconvenient. But no, because you're not a replacement for them. You're your own person, your own struggle, your own strength, helping you. It didn't fix what I lost, but it gave me purpose again. Gave me a reason to remember that sometimes the world's cruelty can be answered with kindness." Sarah felt her own tears falling. "I'm not going to let them take this from us. From you. You've lost enough. We've both lost enough," Ezra corrected. "That's why we fight. Not just for the land, but for the right to decide our own futures. Railroad thinks they can just take what they want. They're about to learn that some people don't move easy." The next morning, they began preparations in earnest. Ezra rode to Silverton to find a lawyer, to file formal objections, to make noise about the railroad's overreach. Sarah wrote letters to the territorial governor, to newspapers, to anyone who might listen. She documented everything: her transformation from abandoned cripple to successful businesswoman, the illegal tactics of the surveyors, the corruption of eminent domain. But more than that, she prepared herself. If the railroad came with force, she would be ready. Ezra taught her to load and fire the rifles faster, to reload the pistol one-handed if necessary, to think tactically about defending the homestead. "I'm not a soldier," she protested after a particularly intense training session. "No," Ezra agreed, You're better. You're someone who's already survived being thrown away, someone who's rebuilt herself from nothing, someone who knows exactly what she's fighting for. That makes you more dangerous than any soldier. Over the following weeks, the railroad pressed harder. Crews appeared, starting to clear trees at the edge of Ezra's property. Legal notices arrived, demanding evacuation within 30 days. Threats came from hired troublemakers, men paid to intimidate and harass. Through it all, Sarah and Ezra stood firm. They documented every violation, every threat, every illegal trespass. They made the railroad's behavior public, sending reports to newspapers, to territorial officials, to anyone who would listen. And slowly, surprisingly, support began to arrive. Doc Winters visited again, bringing word that Bitter Creek, shamed by their treatment of Sarah, had officially protested the railroad's tactics. Other communities joined in, seeing the precedent this fight would set. If the railroad could simply take Ezra's land, no one's property was safe. Letters arrived from unexpected sources, other disabled people who'd heard Sarah's story and were inspired by her resistance, business owners who'd bought her goods and respected her work. Even some former soldiers who'd served with Ezra and remembered his character. One letter came from a lawyer in Denver offering to take the case pro bono. "Your fight matters beyond your personal situation," he wrote. "This is about whether power and money can simply roll over individual rights. I'd be honored to help you make that stand." As summer turned toward autumn, Sarah realized something profound. The town that threw her away had inadvertently set in motion something larger than any of them understood. Her survival, her success, her refusal to accept the world's judgment had become a symbol, not just of disability rights, but of the fundamental human right to determine one's own worth and place in the world. The railroad had picked the wrong mountain to cross, and they were about to discover just how fierce a woman could be when she had nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. September brought a letter that changed everything. The Denver lawyer, a man named Samuel Morrison, arrived at the cabin personally, riding up the mountain path with documents and determination. He was a small man with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd spent years fighting powerful opponents. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Stone," he said, accepting coffee and a seat on the porch. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly, and I have good news and difficult news." "Start with difficult," Ezra said. "We're used to that." Morrison spread papers on the work table. "The railroad's eminent domain claim has technical merit. The territorial legislature approved the survey route, and this pass is legitimately the most practical option through the range. A purely legal fight, based on property rights, will likely fail." Sarah felt her stomach drop, but Morrison held up a hand. "However, there's another angle. The railroad violated proper procedure in multiple ways. They threatened you before legal evacuation notices were filed. They trespassed repeatedly without proper authorization. Most importantly, they failed to offer fair compensation or proper relocation assistance. We can't stop the railroad entirely, but we can force them to the negotiating table." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means we make their violations public and costly, force them to pay fair market value, plus compensation for harassment and illegal tactics, make them provide suitable relocation land or funding, and most importantly, we delay them long enough that winter sets in. Railroad construction in these mountains stops dead when snow comes. That gives us leverage." Ezra leaned forward. "You're talking about a fight that lasts months." "Yes, and it will get ugly. Clayton Wolfe strikes me as a man who doesn't like being told no. When legal pressure increases, he may resort to extra-legal methods. You need to be prepared for that." "We're prepared," Sarah said firmly. Morrison studied her with approval. "I believe you are, Mrs. Caldwell. Your story has garnered significant attention. The territorial governor is watching this case. Several newspapers are following it. The railroad would prefer this go away quietly, but you've made that impossible. That's your greatest weapon. Over the next 2 weeks, Morrison filed motions, injunctions, and formal complaints. Each document was meticulously researched, each argument carefully constructed. The railroad's lawyers responded with their own paperwork, but Morrison was relentless, finding violations and procedural errors at every turn. Meanwhile, the homestead became a fortress. Ezra reinforced the cabin, added shutters that could be barred from inside, stockpiled ammunition and supplies. He taught Sarah not just to shoot, but to reload under pressure, to maintain weapons, to think defensively. "We're not looking for a fight," he explained, "but if they bring one, we need to be able to hold them off long enough for help to arrive." Sarah created a custom rifle holster that strapped to her chair, keeping the weapon within constant reach. She practiced drawing and firing until the motions became instinctive. Her arms, already strong from months of work, grew stronger still from the physical demands of preparation. Doc Winters visited again in late September, bringing news from Bitter Creek and unexpected support. A dozen men from the town volunteered to come up the mountain if trouble started, not out of guilt alone, but genuine respect for what Sarah had accomplished and outrage at the railroad's tactics. "Mayor Hargrove is leading the group," Doc Winters said. "He sees this as a chance to make amends and score political points. Cynical, perhaps, but the help is real." "I don't trust Hargrove," Sarah said. "He cast me out once already." "Then trust that he's a politician who sees which way the wind is blowing. Public opinion has turned strongly in your favor. Supporting you is good politics now. Does his motivation matter if the result is useful?" Sarah thought about that. Pride wanted to refuse help from the town that had betrayed her. Pragmatism said to accept any advantage in the coming fight. "Tell them to be ready," she decided. "But they follow Ezra's orders if they come. This is his land, his fight. I won't have Hargrove trying to take command." October arrived with the first serious snow. The railroad crews worked frantically, trying to complete surveys and initial clearing before winter made it impossible. Clayton Wolfe appeared regularly, his frustration evident as legal delays mounted and deadlines approached. One afternoon, he climbed to the cabin alone, leaving his men below. Sarah was outside, working despite the cold, when he approached. Ezra appeared in the doorway behind her, rifle in hand but not raised. "Mrs. Caldwell," Wolfe said, his tone attempting reasonableness. "This has gone on long enough. The railroad is prepared to make you a generous offer, enough money to buy land anywhere you want, set you up for life. All you have to do is convince Stone to accept the buyout and move on." "This is my home," Sarah said. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price." Wolfe stepped closer. "You've built a good business here, proven yourself capable despite," he gestured at her chair, "despite your limitations. But winter's coming. Construction will resume in spring. Fighting us only delays the inevitable." "Sometimes delay is victory," Sarah replied. "Every day you're not building costs your company money. Every legal motion damages your reputation. Every newspaper article makes other communities question whether they want your railroad running through their land. We might not win forever, but we can make losing so expensive you choose to root elsewhere." Wolfe's pleasant facade cracked. "You think you're clever, using your situation for sympathy, playing the poor, crippled woman against the big, bad railroad. But sentiment doesn't stop progress, Mrs. Caldwell. One way or another, we're coming through this pass. Then you'll have to come through us," Ezra said from the doorway, "and that will cost you more than you want to pay. A hermit and a cripple against a railroad company?" Wolfe laughed harshly. "Those aren't good odds. Add a territorial governor watching for corruption, newspapers documenting every violation, and communities ready to support us," Sarah countered. "How do your odds look now?" Wolfe stared at her, reassessing. "You've become quite formidable, Mrs. Caldwell. Your old town was right to be afraid of you." They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of themselves, of what my existence said about their own vulnerability. That fear made them cruel. Your fear of losing time and money is making you the same way. Something dangerous flickered in Wolf's eyes. Last chance. Take the offer. Walk away while you can. We'll see you in court, Sarah said evenly, or wherever else this fight leads. Wolf left without another word, but his parting look promised this wasn't over. That night, she rolled to the window and looked out at the moonlit clearing, the forest beyond, the mountain peaks rising against the stars. This place had saved her life in ways beyond physical survival. It had given her purpose, dignity, and a future she could build with her own hands. Ezra appeared beside her, wrapped in a blanket. Worried, terrified, Sarah admitted, but also certain. This matters, Ezra, not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, that they're in the way, that they should just accept displacement and be grateful for whatever scraps are offered. You've become quite the fighter, he said with quiet pride. You taught me to survive. The mountain taught me to thrive. Wolf and his railroad are about to learn that there's a difference between the two. Over the next weeks, tension escalated. Railroad crews tried to work on the edges of the property, only to find their equipment mysteriously damaged overnight. Surveyors' marks disappeared. Supply caches went missing. Nothing violent, nothing that could be prosecuted, but enough disruption to slow progress significantly. Wolf responded by hiring troublemakers, men with criminal histories who specialized in intimidation. They camped at the base of the mountain, occasionally riding up to make threats or cause minor destruction. Ezra and Sarah documented everything, sending reports to Morrison, to the newspapers, to territorial marshals. The first real violence came on a cold November morning. 3 of Wolf's hired men rode up while Ezra was checking distant traps. They surrounded the cabin, shouting threats, firing shots into the air, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. Sarah remained inside, rifle in hand, watching through shutters. She recognized the tactic, try to draw her outside, separate her from the defensible cabin, make her vulnerable. "Come out, cripple," one man yelled. "Let's see how tough you are without Stone here to protect you." Sarah aimed carefully and fired through the shutter gap. The shot hit the dirt directly between the lead man's horse's front feet. The animal reared, throwing its rider, while the other horses spooked and scattered. "Next shot won't miss," Sarah called out. "Leave now or find out." The men retreated, cursing but recognizing they'd underestimated their target. When Ezra returned an hour later, Sarah was calm but shaking slightly from adrenaline. "They're escalating," Ezra said, examining the bullet holes in the trees where the men had fired. "So will we," Sarah replied. "Send word to Doc Winters. Tell him we need those volunteers from Bitter Creek, and send to Morrison. It's time to force this to a head." Morrison arrived 3 days later with news. "The territorial marshal is coming to investigate the harassment complaints. He'll be here in a week. If we can hold until then, document any further violations, we have a strong case for criminal charges against Wolf and his men." "A week," Sarah said. "We can hold a week." But she knew, and Ezra knew, and Morrison knew, that Wolf wouldn't wait a week. He'd gambled too much, pushed too hard, to back down now. The final confrontation was coming, and it would come soon. That evening, Sarah wrote in Mary's journal by lamplight, her words steady despite the fear beneath them. Day 312. Tomorrow we stand for everything we've built, and everyone who's been told their place is wherever others decide to put them. I'm not the woman they sent to die on this mountain. I'm not even the woman who arrived here broken and hopeless. I'm someone new, forged by struggle and strengthened by purpose. Whatever comes, I will meet it on my feet, in my own way, on my own terms. They threw me away once. I will not be moved again. She closed the journal, checked her rifle, and prepared for the battle ahead. The standoff held for long minutes, tension thick enough to cut. Wolf's men shifted nervously, looking to their leader for direction. The Bitter Creek volunteers sat steady, weapons ready but not raised, their presence a clear message. Then another sound reached them, a single rider moving fast up the trail. All eyes turned as a man wearing a territorial marshal's badge rode into the clearing, his horse lathered from hard travel. Marshal James Garrett was an older man with iron-grey hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades enforcing law on the frontier. He took in the scene with practiced eyes, noting the armed groups, the defensive positions, the clear preparation for violence. "Someone want to explain this?" His voice carried authority that cut through the tension. Wolf attempted to speak first, but the marshal held up a hand. "Not you. I've had complaints about you. Stone, what's happening here?" Ezra lowered his rifle slightly, but didn't step down from the porch. "Marshal Garrett, Continental Pacific Railroad is attempting to seize my property by force. They claim eminent domain, but proper legal procedures haven't been followed. I have documentation." "I've seen the documentation," Garrett said. "Your lawyer Morrison sent everything to my office, filed formal complaints about harassment, trespassing, and illegal intimidation tactics." He turned to Wolf. "Mr. Wolf, you've got some explaining to do." "The railroad has legal authority," Wolf insisted. "The territorial legislature approved the route. This man is interfering with legitimate business. By defending his own property he's owned and maintained for 6 years, Garrett pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I've reviewed the case file. The railroad did receive route approval, but you failed to follow proper acquisition procedures. No formal offer of compensation was made, no relocation assistance was provided. And you've been documented making threats, damaging property, and now you show up with armed men to force eviction." "We need to begin construction," Wolf protested. "Legal delays are costing the company thousands." "That's not my problem. My problem is you breaking laws while claiming legal authority." Garrett's expression was hard. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to leave this property immediately. The railroad will file proper acquisition papers through the territorial court. Fair compensation will be determined by independent assessors. Until that process is complete, this land remains Stone's property, and any further trespassing will result in criminal charges." "This is ridiculous," Wolf said. "One man and a crippled woman are holding up progress for an entire railroad." "That crippled woman," Sarah called from the cabin, rolling herself into view on the porch beside Ezra, "has documented every violation your company committed, every threat, every illegal trespass, every intimidation tactic. The territorial governor has copies, so do 3 newspapers. So you might want to choose your next words more carefully." Marshal Garrett looked at Sarah with evident respect. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've read about your situation, what was done to you by Bitter Creek, what you've accomplished here. It's impressive." "Thank you, Marshal. I just want to keep my home and live in peace." "That's a reasonable request." Garrett turned back to Wolf. "The railroad can route through here if the legal process determines that's appropriate. But it will be done lawfully, with proper compensation, and with respect for the property owner's rights, not through force and intimidation." Wolf's jaw worked with suppressed fury. "The company won't forget this interference." "Good. I hope they remember it next time they're tempted to cut legal corners." Garrett's hand rested on his pistol. "Now leave. Take your hired guns with you. And Mr. Wolf, don't come back to this property without proper legal authorization. If I hear you've made any more threats or caused any more trouble, I'll personally arrest you for criminal trespass and attempted theft." For a moment, it seemed Wolf might argue further. His men watched him, waiting for orders, clearly hoping he'd back down. The Bitter Creek volunteers remained ready, and Ezra's stance suggested he'd welcome an excuse to finally act. Finally, Wolf jerked his horse's reins around. "Let's go." "But this isn't finished, Stone. When the legal process plays out, we'll be back." Then come back legally, Sarah said. With papers and proper procedures, we'll fight you in court like civilized people instead of with guns like thieves. Wolf and his men rode out, their retreat watched closely by the marshal and volunteers. Only when they disappeared down the trail did the tension finally break. Marshal Garrett dismounted and approached the porch. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Stone, you've made powerful enemies. The railroad doesn't like losing." "They haven't lost yet," Ezra said. "Just been reminded they have to follow the law like everyone else." "True, but you've set an important precedent. Other communities are watching this case. What happens here will matter beyond just your property." Garrett looked at the assembled Bitter Creek men. "Gentlemen, thank you for your assistance. Your presence likely prevented violence today." Mayor Hargrove stepped forward. "Marshal, we'd like to make a formal statement supporting the Stones' claim. Bitter Creek stands with them." It was theater, Sarah knew, political maneuvering to restore the town's reputation, but it was also genuine in its way, and it was effective. Doc Winters approached the porch, looking up at Sarah with eyes that held both shame and pride. "You've become remarkable, Sarah. What you've built here, who you've become. We were wrong about you. About everything." Sarah felt the old anger flicker, then fade. "You were afraid. Fear makes people cruel. But you're here now, when it matters. That counts for something." The sun broke through the morning clouds, lighting the clearing. The crisis had passed. Not permanently, but for now. The railroad would return through legal channels, and that fight would continue. But today's victory was real, and it was shared. Standing on her porch, rifle still in hand, Sarah looked at the assembled people who'd come to her defense and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something like it. The end of one story and the start of another. 6 months later, in the soft light of an early spring morning, Sarah sat on her porch and watched the world wake around her. The snow had mostly melted, revealing new grass and wildflowers beginning to push through the earth. The air carried the scent of pine and possibility. Above the cabin door hung a new sign, carved by Ezra and painted by Sarah. "Stone and Caldwell, leather goods and trapping." A partnership made official, a home made permanent. The legal battle with the railroad had ended 3 months ago. After months of court proceedings, independent assessments, and mounting negative publicity, Continental Pacific had chosen to route through a different pass. The cost of fighting Sarah and Ezra, both in money and reputation, had proven too high. Their victory had set precedents that would protect other small landowners for years to come. Sarah's business had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Orders came from across the territory now, requests for her custom work, her distinctive craftsmanship. She'd hired 2 assistants from Silverton, young women who came twice a week to help with production and learn her techniques. The workshop addition to the cabin was complete, giving her space to work and teach. But more than the business, more than the legal victory, what filled Sarah with quiet satisfaction was the life she'd built, the person she'd become. She heard Ezra moving inside, preparing morning coffee, the familiar sounds of their shared routine. He emerged onto the porch carrying 2 cups, handed her one, and settled into his chair beside her. "Spring's coming early this year," he observed. "Good, more time to work." Sarah sipped her coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "The order from Denver is going to take 3 full weeks. Custom saddles, matching tack. It's the biggest commission yet. You'll manage it. You always do." Ezra's quiet pride was evident. "Got a letter yesterday from Morrison. Says other lawyers are citing your case in property rights arguments. You've become something of a legal precedent." Sarah smiled. "Never thought I'd be a legal precedent. Just wanted to keep my home." "You did more than that. You changed how people think. About disability, about worth, about what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's judgments." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning unfold. A family of deer moved through the lower meadow. Birds called from the trees. The mountain breathed around them, alive and eternal. Doc Winters visited regularly now, making the climb with less difficulty as the weather improved. He'd become a genuine friend, his earlier failure to defend Sarah forgiven if not forgotten. Through him, Sarah heard news from Bitter Creek. The town had changed. Humbled by their own cruelty's consequences, learning slowly to be more compassionate. Mrs. Thornton had written several times, seeking not just forgiveness but genuine friendship. Sarah had responded politely but distantly. Some wounds healed with time, but the scars remained. She harbored no active anger toward the town anymore, but neither did she feel any need to return to their community. This mountain was her community now. The trappers and traders who stopped by, sharing news and stories. The customers who made the journey to commission work directly. The occasional visitor who'd heard her story and came seeking inspiration. She'd become, in her own quiet way, a fixture of the territory's landscape. A rider appeared on the trail, and Sarah recognized Morrison's distinctive bay horse. The lawyer dismounted and climbed to the porch, accepting coffee and a seat. "Brought you something," he said, pulling papers from his bag. "Official recording of your property deed, Stone and Caldwell joint ownership, legally registered and protected. No one can touch it now." Sarah took the papers, running her fingers over the official seals, her name written in permanent ink, not Sarah Caldwell, widow, burden charity case, just Sarah Caldwell, landowner, businesswoman, equal partner. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything. It was my honor. Your case, what you accomplished, it reminded me why I became a lawyer. To protect people who deserve protecting, to fight power when it oversteps." Morrison finished his coffee. "I should tell you there's interest from a publisher. They want to tell your story, make it available to a wider audience. You'd have full control over what's shared, of course." Sarah glanced at Ezra, who shrugged. "Your story, your choice." She thought about it, about the woman she'd been when Bitter Creek cast her out, broken and hopeless, about the journey to this porch, this moment, this life, about other people in similar situations who might need to hear that transformation was possible. Let them write it, she decided. But truthfully, no sugarcoating the pain or the struggle. People need to understand both the cruelty and the possibility. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to us opens the door to becoming who we were always meant to be. Morrison left with her agreement and her promise to review any manuscript before publication. After he'd gone, Sarah and Ezra sat together as the day warmed around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Ezra asked quietly. "Staying here instead of returning to easier country?" Sarah looked at her hands, strong and calloused from work. At the workshop where her craft took shape, at the mountain peaks rising against the blue sky, at the man beside her who'd caught her when the world threw her away and given her space to become herself. "Never," she said. "This mountain saved my life. Not just by giving me shelter, but by demanding I become strong enough to deserve it. The town wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became more visible than ever, more capable than they imagined, more valuable than they understood." She picked up a piece of leather she'd been working on, running her thumb over the stitching. "They called me worthless, sent me here to prove it. Instead, I proved that worth isn't granted by others. It's built by our own hands, our own determination, our own refusal to accept the world's cruelty as the final word." Ezra nodded slowly. "Mary would have liked you, would have recognized a kindred spirit. I wish I could have known her. And Lily, in a way, you do. Their story is part of why you're here, why I was ready to help. Their loss taught me that the world's judgment doesn't determine value. Your survival proved it." The sun climbed higher, warming the porch, the cabin, the cleared land around them. Sarah would work soon, fulfilling orders, creating beauty from raw materials, building her business and her reputation one stitch at a time. But for now, She simply sat in the peace of the morning, on the porch of the home she'd earned, beside the friend who'd become family, in the life she'd built from the ashes of the one she'd lost. The town had sent her to the mountain as a joke, a cruel disposal of someone they deemed worthless. They'd expected her to fail, to die, to disappear into obscurity. Instead, she'd proven them wrong in every way that mattered. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, she would continue proving it, not for them, but for herself. And for everyone who'd ever been told they were less than they were. The person everyone throws away can become the one who matters most. Sarah Caldwell was living proof. She smiled, picked up her coffee, and watched her mountain come alive with spring. Home. Finally, truly, home.